And except for school groups that, you know, were brought to the museum and just ran through it without really looking because they weren't very well prepared, mostly there were people who were the leisured classes who were brought up to enjoy museums, or they were scholars who were there to see a particular item. And now everybody is there. And I think it's the result of several important issues. One, of course, was the GI Bill of Rights that gave a lot of people the opportunity to go to college and to understand, to learn more and to appreciate what they could see and do with their leisure time. Secondly, there were labor laws that allowed people to have more leisure time. Thirdly, there were tax laws that made corporations and individuals more eager to give to the arts. And I guess instant communication, too, television and the global village idea that people began to see on their television what was art and to hear what was art, and they wanted to come and see what it was all about.
There's been a lot of discussion about de-ascensioning works from museums. A lot of controversy in some cases. I suppose if someone donates, say, a work of art, they want it to remain in perpetuity in the museum and they don't want it de-ascensioned. How do you handle that at the Smithsonian and other institutions, and how should it be handled?
Well, it's handled in various ways, but increasingly with great caution, because, as you correctly state, there has been problems in the recent past with museums selling off objects that they were told the Metropolitan was involved in such a controversy. They were, it was written in the will, this is to remain in the Metropolitan. For example, I don't like to single that museum out, but that has received a lot of attention in perpetuity. But museums today are really trying not to accept anything with that kind of proviso. And I think a wonderful example of this was the Smithsonian's Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden donated, the works were all donated by Joe Hirshhorn, the great art collector. And when Joe gave the gift, he specifically stipulated that any of the works could be deaccessioned at any time depending upon the board and the director of the museum. And works indeed have been deaccessioned. They've been sold at auction. And one interesting thing that has happened to them is that some of the works, since Joe was such an eclectic collector, have found their homes in other Smithsonian museums. An example is that he had a great collection of Benin art, African art, and it now adorns a whole gallery in the Museum of African Art.
I didn't know that the Smithsonian de-ascensioned any works.
They have not done it illegally, but they have. This has been a big example. As I say, the Smithsonian museums have profited from this, but the Hirshhorn itself has profited. First place, the Smithsonian has repaid the Hirshhorn for what has gone to other museums, but the works that have been sold at auction have provided income for the Hirshhorn to purchase what have been holes in the collection. And many of these works have either been duplicates, because Joe was such a big buyer, he'd go into a artist's studio and say, I'll take 4 of these and 10 of these, that there were some duplications. And also, I don't know if you know this, but after Joe gave his gift, he went out and bought a whole new collection. And then he died, unfortunately, and he left the whole new collection to the Smithsonian. So he often replaced what he already had, what he'd already given away, because he loved it so much. And we have 2 Henry Moores, one that he bought for $50,000, and one that he bought years later for, I'm probably understating if I say $250,000. And they were exactly alike, huge sculptures, and you know, we really didn't need 2 of them. And so these are the kinds of things that we're able to deaccession.
Henry Moores are very collectible today.
Very, even increasingly so, of course, because he died recently.
Yes. And then you think that museums should have that latitude?
Well, you know, as I say, it depends upon agreement with the donor. If a donor is looking for immortality, which many donors are, they can go to a museum and say, look, I want you to keep this forever. And if the museum says no, they may go to another museum and says, sure, we'd love it. And that depends upon the collection itself, the strength of the museum. You know, the Metropolitan can say no, for example, or the National Gallery can say no because they have so many fantastic works. But a smaller museum in a smaller community can say, certainly, we would love that work because it may be the only one like it they'll ever see.
Could be the centerpiece of their whole collection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that it really depends on what museum is offered to. But I would say illegally, no. I mean, I certainly am against deaccessioning if there's something written in a will that says you can't, and the museum has accepted that.
Do you think there's renewed interest in supporting our museums by the public and donors and government?
There's a good deal of interest by the public in general. Our membership has grown by leaps and bounds. We have about 14,000 new members this year. Now, we have 80% retention, so some of these new members replaced ones that have moved away or died or gone on Social Security or have been irritated at something or other. So the public, certainly, if you go to any museum, last night someone asked me the question, they went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York and could barely get in. And the shows there are very good. You wouldn't think they would attract that kind of attention. But the question right now this year has been, what is the support from the very large donors and the corporations, because the tax laws have changed so. And people, the individuals and the corporations, really don't know yet what the tax laws are going to mean this year or next year, because they're changing again next year. They don't know how they aren't quite sure yet what giving away money to charity, and the museums have to be called a form of charity, is going to mean to their bottom line.
So everyone's a little cautious.
Right. There's a little caution going on this year. Other things?